And now we have Primeape. Those who watched the Indigo League anime will recall the episode where a Mankey steals Ash's hat and his donuts in the English dub, and evolves into a Primeape after Ash pisses it off. Ash caught it and then, in typical Ash fashion, ditched it in a few episodes later, even after it won him that tournament. Today we'll be examining if Primeape was able to channel its rage over being abandoned into competitive success. And so, we ask, how good was Primeape actually? And in this video we'll be going over these competitive formats. Primeape is a fighting type in RBY, and therefore, it's completely unviable. It's really that simple. All Gen 1 fighting types live in the shadow of Machamp, who is by far the strongest, and even Machamp can't muster a legitimate niche all the way down in NU. Psychic types are simply too prominent and too powerful in every tier. Perhaps if enough lower tiers are made to exhaust every single psychic type, even the unevolved ones, then the fighting type can finally shine in the first generation. However, until that day comes, Primeape and its same typed cohorts shall remain in the fighting dojo in the first generation Saffron City Gym. Gen 2 saw Machamp rise to prominence as the fighting type in OU, but Machamp being out of the way wasn't enough for Primeape to establish a niche in UU, considering that tier seemed to have gone out of its way to be inhospitable to all fighting types as possible. In addition to the plethora of psychic types, the metagame was also populated by a huge number of poison and flying types. However, this time around, NU was Primeape's prime time. This might seem weird at first, as it did struggle with the two best Pokemon in the tier, Xatu and Weezing. However, those two weren't immovable, and after a meditate boost, Primeape absolutely tore through everything else, establishing itself as the most fearsome sweeper in the tier. Xatu didn't take kindly to a +1 rock slide, especially since it speed tied Primeape and could easily be forced to rest, while Weezing was vulnerable to getting worn down by spikes and other assorted hits before falling into range to be put away by a +1 HP ground, which would also let Primeape break past Arbok. And those were just the Pokemon Primeape didn't immediately threaten too, because there were far more that it did. Being able to so utterly thrash so many of the best defensive Pokemon in the tier, namely Dugong, Chinchou, and Wigglytuff, was invaluable, while faster, frailer offensive Pokemon like Dugtrio and Rapidash couldn't switch into Cross Chop safely at all, especially with spikes on the field. And you had a high number of useful normal, dark, and rock types, meaning that in any given game, Primeape was able to threaten huge portions of an opposing team, and its few checks could only withstand it for so long. In fact, it was so dangerous it was considered the third best Pokemon in the tier, only trailing the two Pokemon that were its best checks, and standing above piles upon piles of its victims. Primeape was unquestionably one of GSC NU's most important, and dare we say, prime Pokemon. Generation 3 bestowed a bevy of buffs on Primeape. It could hit a lot harder and a lot faster with Choice Band and or Focus Punch, while Bulk Up was an improvement on Meditate that also provided a defense boost to make revenge killing more difficult. The EV system, meaning Pokemon no longer had max bulk, let Primeape hit more Pokemon harder as well. It also gained a terrific ability in Vital Spirit, which prevented it from getting slept and potentially even allowed it an avenue to switch in. Finally, it gained Earthquake at long last. Now, bearing the outclassed by Machamp theorem in mind, Primeape wasn't going to be breaking into OU anytime soon. However, it certainly had its place in UU, being able to utterly destroy Tier Queen Kangaskhan, as well as several other staples like Walrein and Cradily, while actually threatening the few switch-ins there were, was an excellent niche to have. Primeape wasn't the only Pokemon to do what it did though, and had to fight for its spot on a team, pun intended, because it had fierce competition with Hitmonlee. Hitmonlee tended to be better on average, but definitely not always, or even by too wide a margin. Both fighters had significant pros and cons. Hitmonlee had a higher attack stat, allowing it to smack fighting resist harder with its coverage moves, as well as launch a stronger Focus Punch. Hitmonlee also had excellent priority in Mach Punch, and an immunity to paralysis by virtue of its excellent ability, Limber. Now, those were excellent qualities, and Hitmonlee was a bit easier to use as a result. And as a bonus, it even had a great natural special defense stat. However, Primeape was by no means wholly outclassed. Unfortunately, some of its advantages were only occasionally useful. For instance, it being less paper thin on the physical side didn't really make a difference, and its higher speed was rarely useful for much besides outrunning Hitmonlee itself. It would have been more notable if anyone ran Jolly Kangaskhan, but they didn't. Technically, Primeape also outran Adamant Scyther, but that wasn't nearly common enough to make a significant difference. Nor could that nature reliably be feasibly gleaned during a battle so as to abuse it with Primeape later. However, Primeape's good qualities could be game-changing, and thus it almost always merited at least some consideration over Hitmonlee. Being able to switch into and blank Vileplume Sleep Powder was huge, considering how irritating it could be for the offensive teams that Primeape was best on. The main draw, though, was that Cross Chop's high base power meant that Primeape actually hit harder than Hitmonlee with its spammable fighting stab. Even with Primeape having 15 less base attack than Hitmonlee, it still outdamaged high jump kick by a significant margin. Then consider that Hitmonlee often went with Brick Break for its perfect accuracy, screen shattering, and lack of recoil, which came at the cost of 10 base power, and the discrepancy in power between the two became even more notable. Even with a jolly nature, Primeape's Cross Chop cleanly 3-hit KO'd offensive Gligar, and could straight up 2-hit KO Nidoking without having to predict at all, neither of which Hitmonlee could accomplish even with an adamant nature. With Cross Chop's high critical hit rate added on, Primeape was absolutely lethal. In good matchups, it was even more fierce than Hitmonlee for this reason. Now, Hitmonlee was easier to fit in on teams, since it could better make up ground with its coverage moves in tougher matchups, such as those against stall teams, thanks to its higher attack, and Mach Punch was all sorts of useful for keeping sweepers like Reversal Scyther in check. However, Primeape certainly had its place. It and its Cross Chops contributed nicely to the colorful, depth-filled landscape of advanced UU. Generation 4 gifted Primeape one of the best moves in the game, U-Turn, and it was an especially great move for a Psychic type as it punished would-be Psychic type counters hard. Primeape also received an amazing new stab move in close combat, making it fiercer than ever. U-Turn meant Primeape often didn't have to directly compete with Hitmonlee anymore, and the dynamic from Gen 3 UU was flipped. Primeape didn't completely outclass Hitmonlee or anything, but it was generally the better choice. U-Turn was just that amazing of a tool, as it prevented the likes of Yuxi and Slowbro from answering Primeape effectively. Even ghosts weren't safe, as U-Turn would allow Primeape to safely bring in a teammate with Pursuit. Also relevant was Primeape's speed advantage over Hitmonlee, which was now crucial in giving it the jump on major targets like Moltres, Rotom, and Kangaskhan. Primeape was a good choice bander as it brutally threatened common walls like Registeel and Chansey, and was immensely difficult to switch into. However, its bread and butter set was the Choice Scarf variant, which was a great check to speed boosting Pokemon like Rock Polish Torterra, Rock Polish Rhyperior, and Dragon Dance Altaria. The set could easily maintain momentum mid-game with U-Turn, and the sheer power of stab close combat was an amazing cleanup tool. It was incredibly consistent and effortlessly established itself as one of the most efficient Scarfers in the tier. With Spike Sub, it was difficult to answer without a Weezing, and like everything else, Weezing also got U-turned on. As a bonus, Primeape's Vital Spirit was crucial in offsetting the immense threat that was Tier King Venusaur's Sleep Powder, and it could chunk Venusaur for a nice amount on its way out thanks to U-Turn. Overall, Primeape was an excellent Pokemon in Gen 4 UU. But wait, there's more. As it were, Primeape had a niche in none other than Ubers. That's right, with its immunity to Darkrai's Dark Void and resistance to Dark Pulse, it could switch in on and force out one of the scariest Pokemon in the tier. Primeape did have competition in this role from Heracross, who had better special bulk, also resisted Darkrai's Focus Blast, and didn't block Dark Void but abused it with a combination of Guts and Sleep Talk. However, Primeape had its advantages. U-Turn was absolutely enormous, and its higher speed meant it outran Scarf Kyogre and Dialga, which was crucial in making Primeape a fierce late-game cleaner. It was a very small niche, but it was a legitimate niche nonetheless, and it was an incredibly cool one at that. Gen 5's utterly massive power creep sent Primeape tumbling down, dropping from UU, past the new RU, into NU. There, its Scarf set returned with a vengeance. Its close combat effortlessly mowed through nearly all the tier's frail, offensive Pokemon, with the few that didn't instantly or nearly instantly dropping being vulnerable to either its coverage or, as always, U-Turn, paired with the appropriate, easy-to-fit support. This would work for bulky walls like Alomomola as well. They would get U-turned on with Spikes up and get run over easily by Primeape's teammates. Cleaning up at the end of the game was made even easier for Primeape, not just because of the spikes easily thrown down by teammate Garbodor, but also in large part thanks to another teammate, the vicious Choice Band Sock, whose own massively powerful close combat reliably softened the opposition into prime ape conditions. Ghost types, namely the pesky spikes immune thoroughly bulky Eviolite Misdreavus, were barely a hindrance for Primeape either. On its own, sure, but Mischievous, Golurk, and Haunter were susceptible to U-turn just like everything else, and as long as the Primeape's player plentifully prepared per packing pursuit, preeminence prevailed, plus puny psychics paled. Past pretentious phrasing, Primeape was even more dangerous given how well it paired with the tier's volt-switching Rotom appliances, Frost and Fan, either cycling Volt Turn between each other or pairing up to ensure they got a threatening teammate like Charizard in safely. Primeape could also run a Choice Band set. It lacked Sock's raw power and Mold Breaker, but its 95 base speed was a huge advantage, crucially giving it the jump on Rotom Frost, Rotom Fan, Zangoose, Kangaskhan, and Sock itself. And of course, U-Turn was an excellent tool as ever. The surprise factor of Choice Band was amazing as well, easily being able able to mow through a Lomomola on its own. Overall, Primeape wasn't as definitive and iconic a piece of Gen 5 NU as, say, Charizard, but it was quietly, yeah, a quiet Primeape, that's a nice mental image for you. It was quietly one of the best Pokemon around, consistently capable of elevating any team's offenses. NU was looking to be quite a bit tougher for Primeape in Gen 6. The new Fairy-type Clefairy stuffed both U-turn and close combat, while being immune to all the hazards in the universe. Primeape couldn't fit Gunk Shot into its moveset as it needed Earthquake too badly, since that turned Garbodor from a perfect check into nothing but another Pokemon unwilling to switch into it. It was a lose-lose trade-off. Primeape's fighting-type competition, Girder, Hariyama, and Hitmonchan, could at least accomplish something with Clefairy around, with Girder and Hariyama able to knock off its Eviolite, while Hitmonchan could clear the field of hazards with Rapid Spin. These Pokemon's substantially superior bulk also meant they had much better defensive utility than Primeape. As a result, they were much easier to slap on teams and perform with consistently. However, Primeape did have one advantage that neither of those three, nor the tier's other fighting type, Combuskin, could replicate. In the previous generation, it had gained the Defiant ability, but hadn't had much of a chance to use it since there was no Intimidate Pokemon in NU. Now that was still the case in Gen 6, but the Fog had been buffed, and alongside its hazard clearing effect, it also dropped the opposing Pokemon's evasion. This meant Primeape received +2 attack if it switched into a Defog, and made its Choice Band set an absolute wrecking ball. With Rocks up, its close combat would 2-hit KO just about anything that wasn't immune to it, including Clefairy, as well as impressive physical tanks like Weezing and Mesprit, and even the quadruple resistant Xatu. Of course, the tier did have a few ghosts, but they didn't want to eat such a massively boosted Ice Punch, which was quite spammable as it also smacked Poisons, Psychics, and especially Flyers. Given Primate's frailty, it had to be careful about switching into the Fogs against the likes of Shiftry, which could potentially KO it on the switch, but if played right, the Primeape player could force a situation where the opponent's Defogger simply had to defog hazards away, or their team would fall apart, thus making the Primeape switch a win-win. Primate's niche in Gen 6 NU was relatively small, but it was no gimmick. It was one of the most explosive Pokemon in the tier if it got going, and would reward an enterprising trainer for their efforts. Gen 7's power creep knocked Primeape down to PU, but this was very much a blessing in disguise. It established itself as one of the best, most threatening Pokemon in the tier. Many other common top tier Pokemon were ripped apart by its close combat, including but not limited to Ferroseed, Drampa, and Cryogonal. This included many physically bulky Pokemon, as well as notably Regirock and Alolan Sandslash, meaning Primeape was a physical attacker that effortlessly mowed down the primary physical walls. Not all physically bulky Pokemon were weak to fighting, but most of them didn't resist it either. Primarily Mudsdale and Tangela. Plus many actual fighting resists like Victreebel were far too frail to switch in. The lack of Garbodor in the tier also meant Primeape was free to ditch Earthquake without consequence and reap the benefits of Gunk Shot, invalidating Clefairy as an answer as well as Silvally Fairy. Now the tier did have two very sturdy fighting resists. The first was Jellicent, one of the best Pokemon in the tier and excellent against Primeape itself. However, it faltered against Primeape's tried and true strategy of U-turning into a Pursuiter. The second was Quillfish, who had Intimidate, which, thanks to Defiant, just made Primeape stronger and thus couldn't switch into it at all. With these factors, as well as its whole Defog punishing aspect, Primeape was consistently one of the most ferocious Pokemon in the tier, easily capable of ripping through entire teams. Sure, it needed support to perform at its best, but so did Arceus, so that wasn't at all unreasonable. Primeape's Scarf sets were tremendous cleaners, especially on Spike's teams, that fully abused its propensity for U-turn, but it could also run a brutal Choice Band set that took advantage of its great speed stat that naturally got the jump on the majority of the rather mid-paced PU metagame, allowing it to throw out super powerful attacks without much drawback. It could potentially even not run a Pursuiter on its team, making Jellicent think it's safe to come in and run Seed Bomb in its last slot to lure and destroy it. Overall, Primeape was a prime part of Gen 7 PU, helping define and shape the metagame as much as it utterly destroyed it. And that's it. So how good was Primeape actually? Well, past its obligatory miserable debut as a fighting type in Gen 1, it's had a great lower tier career. It's often overlooked as it's not very flashy, but it's had success in every single subsequent generation, ranging from decent sleeper pick at worst to tier defining beast at best. Hopefully Generation 8 gives it something new upon its return, if it returns. Overall, Primeape has been one of the Gen 1 Pokemon with the best careers. It even had a niche in Ubers at one point, and considering it was ditched by Ash Ketchum when he realized it couldn't hold its own even in RBY NU, Primeape's done quite well for itself since then. Thanks for watching, everyone. And as always, if you liked the video and you want to see more, be sure to subscribe to Fall Swipe Gaming for more weekly Pokemon content. And in the comments, I want to know, what do you think about competitive Primeape? How would you buff it to make it better in the higher tiers? What would you give it to make it exist in VGC? Whatever it is, let me know in the comments. Also, thank you so much to our patrons for continued support of our videos. And thank you to everyone else watching as well. And follow my crew on these social media platforms. And that's all I got. See you next time, everyone.